This type of thing happens often enough these days that if we read the headline of this story, we'd probably brush it off as a hoax. But this one's different. It wasn't sensational enough to be a publicity stunt. It wasn't advertised. In fact, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who even remembers it. Pete Garcia, YouTuber. Most of his content was made up of middle-tier pranks and lower-tier parkour. The rest was made up of Pete and his friends throwing rocks through the windows of old abandoned buildings in downtown Harlingen, Texas. He was a pioneer in what would become the most prominent aspect of the modern internet: degeneracy. As hateable as Pete Garcia was in those early years, you couldn't really blame him. He never knew his father, and his mom abandoned him at a hospital when he was 2 years old and she disappeared into Mexico. Pedro Felipe Garcia grew up in the foster system. When he was 14 years old in 2012, he got a digital camera for his birthday and he started posting rage-bait videos on YouTube for attention. The more compassionate would say that it was a pressure valve to release the stress of adolescence. He was a real nightmare. But again, it's hard to blame him. That behavior garnered him almost 60,000 subscribers over the course of 18 months. Half of those subscribers cheered him on, while the other half condemned him. The latter comments were the ones he responded to, obviously. More engagement means more views. The worst of Pete's behavior came in late 2014 when he and two of his friends were at a construction site where a street had been torn up and the crew had left behind piles of large concrete chunks. Naturally, they saw an opportunity to make some content. They gathered a bunch of concrete chunks, found a hiding place in the trees near a curve on the road, then they started recording. When no one was driving by, they'd put a large piece of concrete in the middle of the road, then run back into the trees giggling. They stacked those concrete chunks until they were high enough to cause real damage. Not a scratch, not a swerve. A car accident. A real pileup. The screeching of tires, followed by the crashing, and then the screaming. You'd think he would have felt remorse in that moment, maybe a wake-up call that these types of actions have real consequences. But the moment that first car hit the curb and flipped over the second car, Pete had a bigger smile on his face than any kid you'd ever seen. Pete and his friends ran off when the police arrived and they split up and went home. They thought they'd gotten off scot-free, but Pete did the one thing that all dummies in this niche end up doing. He posted the video. Naturally, it went viral in South Texas. Within 24 hours, he'd made the 6 o'clock news for the first time in his YouTube career, and it wouldn't be the last. The news story had barely ended when the cops showed up at his house, but Pete and his friends weren't the only ones who were in trouble. You see, when the cops arrived, they found his foster parents high out of their minds in the living room. You name it, the cops found it in the house. But it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to that kid. Because by the summer of 2015, he was with a different foster family, and the last thing anyone would have expected happened to him there. He became a pretty good kid. Same Pete, same school, same friends, but totally different behavior. A year after the crash video, he reinvented his YouTube brand. In May of 2015, after 8 months of silence while he did his community service, a calmer Pete Garcia posted a video where he renounced his previous behavior. "I'm gonna lose a lot of subscribers," he said, "but I don't regret it. Nobody is telling me to say this, I'm saying it." He went on to talk about the people he had met doing community service, mostly adults, saying it was like a time machine. He got to look into the future and see what he was going to be like, what he was already turning into. 2 of those adults told him he reminded them of themselves, and that scared him to death. He went on to talk about his parole officer, Mr. Goldman. He said Mr. Goldman was one of the only adults he'd ever met who seemed to care about Pete's future. He said they talked a lot, and Mr. Goldman even made the call that Pete shouldn't have to go to a court-ordered shrink, that it was best if he just went to the parole office twice a week to keep up to date and chat. Mr. Goldman dressed sharp, he said, and people respected him. Nobody ever told him what to do. He was the guy who made the calls and people listened, and he cared about Pete. Pete's new foster mom was a sweetheart. She made less money than his previous foster parents, but he said she always found ways to have fun. She didn't smoke or drink, didn't scream, didn't get into fistfights. There was no one for her to fight with. Everyone who came around was nice, and she didn't go out after dark. At night, she read books, and on the weekends, she built chairs and sold them online. Apparently, she got in a lot of trouble as a kid, but she turned it around. And she smiled a lot. He'd never known any adults who smiled just because. If adults ever smiled, it was because it was payday or because they just got a hit of whatever their poison was. He didn't say this next part, but the message was clear. His whole life, he was taught that happiness was circumstantial and misery was the default. At his new foster home, it was reversed, and that was the life he wanted to live forever. He even cried in the video, and he apologized to anyone he hurt and anyone he influenced. Even though he was only 13 years old, he was right on point. He got to learn these necessary lessons earlier than most people do, lessons that a lot of people never even get a chance to learn. Not only did he stop posting rage bait, but he did exactly the opposite. He started posting videos on how to grill meats, how to tie ties, how to change a tire, and myriad other masculinities, none of which he ever learned well enough to teach. But it got teenage boys trying to learn how to do them anyhow, and more experienced boys and men often chimed in with advice in the comments section. From breaking windows to building communities overnight. He called it the manly how-to. And he'd been right. He lost more than half of his subscribers, down to 47,000. But the videos were almost daily, and within 9 months he jumped back up to almost 70,000, and by the end of the year he had over 140,000. The most viewed manly how-to was titled How to Change the Oil in a Lawnmower. Let's just say there was a fire involved, but thankfully no one was hurt. At first, viewers thought it was a prank because the camera angles were too perfect. He even got the priceless reaction of his 70-year-old neighbor Henry, a regular in the background of his videos, dawdling to his cell phone to call the fire department, saying, "Oh geez, oh Christ, young man, now you went and did it." When it made the local news in Harlingen, social media spread it with laughter. Soon it was national news. Major reporters were warning people to be safe when making YouTube videos while showing Pete Garcia's channel on TV screens across the country. That very day, Pete skyrocketed to 970,000 subscribers, and he was in no trouble for the fire, and it was perhaps the most educational video in the series, if only it had been titled How Not to Change the Oil in a Lawnmower. Soon he realized that others were teaching manly knowledge on the same platform, only better and more safely than he could, so he left it to them. The manly how-to was short-lived, but was one of viewers' favorites on the platform for a time. After the rebranding, he was in YouTube's good graces, and pranks on his channel were limited to telling mildly dirty jokes to his Puritan foster mom, who often struggled to hold her laughter while she scolded him. He was no maverick on the platform, but he was a favorite, not because of the content, but because of Pete himself. He was an accidental inspiration. He showed people that even someone who came from nothing could manage to reach millions, and there were millions of people out there whom nobody ever cared to reach. Millions who felt heard because of him. It's important to remember this about him. Too often, our final and lasting memories of a person are their tragic ends rather than their beautiful beginnings. It's easy these days to say that Pete Garcia went crazy. Easier still to blame society for his upbringing. We should blame society for much of what happened, but only his mother and father are to blame for his childhood. Society at large is guilty of watching and laughing and doing nothing as he spiraled into madness for everyone to see. The first time viewers noticed anything strange was in a video from May of 2016 called "My Perspective of Salvation Changed with This Statement." In the video, he said he'd been to church that morning and the pastor had said, "Jesus wasn't sent to save us from the wrath of the devil. He was sent to save us from the wrath of God." Then he went into detail. If it was the first time you'd watched one of his videos, you wouldn't have known anything was off. In all of his videos, Pete was looking right at the camera, so he spoke directly to you. But not this time. In this video from May of 2016, he was looking off to the side the entire time. His eyes stayed on one object. and he was speaking more slowly than usual. It happens, I guess. People change, no big deal, right? The next few videos were normal, but then in November he posted an hour-long video, and it was just footage of the wooden fence in his backyard. The video was titled, "These Dogs Won't Stop Barking, LOL." But there were no dogs barking. The whole hour was birds chirping and nearby traffic sounds. The strangeness of it went over no one's head, though most of the comments were just jokes about what a weird decision it was to post that video. A few even tried to decipher it, believing it contained a hidden message, but there didn't seem to be one. Then came the big one. On Christmas Day of 2016, he posted a video titled Slay Bell, SLAYBELLE. The entire video was a time-lapse of his corgi's body rotting and decaying. Apparently, the dog had died a year prior, and he began filming it each day. At the end of the video, he was seen crying and burying the poor thing in his backyard. He never said a word. The dog's name was Belle, and we don't know how she died. That was the first strike he ever got on YouTube, and it was for animal cruelty, though some argued that the video didn't show any animal cruelty, and that's objectively true. Probably someone was disturbed by the footage and reported it. His next video, posted on January 22nd, 2017, was only 2 minutes long, and it showed Pete in a very different light than we'd ever seen him in before, even in the hooligan days. The video showed him angrily venting his frustrations with them. Who they were, no one knows but Pete.
"I don't know who YouTube thinks they are,"
he said.
"What I'm doing is right. I'm the only one trying to expose them. What is this platform even for if I can't use it to expose evil?"
This was obviously in reference to Slay Bell and the community guidelines strike that was put on the video.
"They're following me. They're watching me. They're not going to stop until I expose them for the whole world to see. They're trying to kill me. I'm not going to stop exposing them, and these guidelines are not going to get in my way."
Some people speculated and theorized about who he was talking about, but most people just laughed, either because they thought it was a prank or they recognized that he was really in pain, and they enjoyed it. I mean, what else are people supposed to think? When everyone's growing up getting their movies, TV shows, and memes from the same screen where they read personal texts and watch the news, how do we expect anyone to take anything seriously? Pete's channel reached a standstill, no posts from March to July of 2017. Then on July 24th, he posted an 18-second video of him showing a huge gash on the left side of his torso. Bright red blood was dripping down to his jeans, and each step from his bare feet was slappy and sloshy. He was sniffling, saying,
"They won't stop until I'm dead."
Then the camera cut off. YouTube removed the video after 2 hours, citing community guidelines. On September 30th, 2017, Pete Garcia posted a 30-second video. In it, he sat down calmly and smiled. Just looking at his demeanor, everybody anticipated an explanation for his strange behavior. Then he recalled his May 2016 video, saying, "Jesus wasn't sent to save us from the wrath of the devil." His eyes went to the window behind the camera, and a shadow passed over his face, like someone was walking by. He said, "No one will save us from that." From the background came the sound of footsteps that made the old floorboards creak. The steps came at a normal speed and were followed by the voice of a woman whom people assumed was his foster mother. She said, "Pedro?" And the video ended there. It was pretty dramatic, and the people in the comments who once found entertainment in Pete's emotional outbursts were suddenly more sympathetic. "It's actually not all that funny," said one regular viewer. "Now that I think about it, the dude is obviously losing it. I hope he's getting help." And that was the final video that Pete Garcia ever posted. But it's where the story really begins. In March of 2018, a Reddit user by the name of AlleyCat27 made a post titled, "What Happened to Pete Garcia?" Here's what it said. I grew up in Brazil and I'm currently in my freshman year at an American university. For my first ever spring break, I headed to the nearest party spot, South Padre Island, Texas, for some American-style debauchery. On my first night, I was at an outdoor nightclub by the beach when I came across a group of male friends who didn't fit in with the rest of the crazy college students. They were drunkenly discussing the decline of society and the never-ending slew of brain rot content on social media. I admit I was eavesdropping. I didn't really have anyone else to talk to. At one point, one of the guys poured half a beer onto the beach and said, "For Pete Garcia, rest in peace." Well, that caught my attention. I've been a fan of Pete Garcia's since the hooligan days. I approached them and said, "You're not talking about the YouTuber Pete Garcia, are you?" Just in case they had a friend with the same name who'd passed away. But they nodded. The least drunk of the bunch said, "Well, we don't know for sure that he's dead. We're just assuming." Then he told me the story. A few weeks ago, Pete Garcia ran into the police station in Brownsville, Texas. Now he's from Harlingen, 30 miles west of Brownsville, but he showed up at the Brownsville police station. He was covered in blood, saying they wanted to kill him, but he didn't have any wounds on him and the blood wasn't his. So Brownsville police sent Harlingen police to do a wellness check on Pete's foster home. And they found a massacre. 7 houses on that street had been broken into, and 9 people had been stabbed with a kitchen knife. And unfortunately, Pete's foster mom was among the deceased. So far, that's all verified, and the next part is only a rumor. But apparently they arrested Pete on the spot because they suspected him of the stabbings. They were going to transfer him to a county jail in the morning, and a detective was going to question him, but Pete wasn't in his cell in the morning. There was no official order to release him, and it looked like someone had left his cell door open. No one knows how he got out of the building, though, and no one has seen him since. There were plenty of comments under AlleyCat's post from people who lived along the southern Texas border, from McAllen to Port Isabel, including people who went to the high school in Harlingen that Pete Garcia had claimed to attend. Apparently, no one had ever met the guy. Brownsville PD were asked about it, and they said that the arrest story never happened. But the murders of Pete's neighbors in Harlingen were documented, and Harlingen PD swore up and down that they had 3 phone conversations with Brownsville PD over the course of 2 days. And according to amateur investigations, both departments were telling the truth as they saw it. The assumption was that the person who called Harlingen PD was Pete himself, posing as Brownsville PD. AlleyCat's post went on for a while and ended with the following semi-poetic rant. It's so bizarre. Even when I went back to watch the videos he posted from 2012 to 2015, the ones where he was a real menace to society, I felt I related to him. I knew how it felt to resort to throwing rocks at abandoned buildings because we couldn't afford entertainment. I knew how hard it was to master the skateboard tricks he took forever to master. I knew the dry, pasty feeling of sweat and dirt covering my hands because I'd been running around all summer with my friends. I knew what the sunset in the background of his videos smelled like. Being a child in poverty is in a way kind of like being the king of the world, but it's a world you hate. It's a world where you have to live in the moment because the moment is all you have to live in. But watching Pete's videos, it gave kids like me hope that we didn't have to live our lives stealing cigarettes and smoking them in alleys. That our fathers walking out on us didn't mean we had to be screw-ups, and maybe that would result in a future where kids like me could wear business attire to work and have their names on an office door. That we could live in country clubs and have children to live for instead of just fleeting moments. I grew up in a favela in Brazil. Not the most hopeful place on earth, but now I'm a student at an American university, and the only way that I could do that was with hope. The first time I ever saw a person grow and change into something better than what they already were was watching Pete's videos. But when he was in need of some hope, we mocked him. We laughed at him for suffering. We made fun of him. It makes no sense. Our generation has lived our whole lives looking for someone to listen to us and represent us, and when we finally found someone who did, we laughed at him for his own misery. And now he's gone because he couldn't find anyone who could be for him what he was for me. Lives literally depend on people taking them seriously, and there isn't a single person reading this who doesn't know that we failed that boy. I'm done. The comments went on for a few days, mostly questions about old hooligan friends of Pete's who appeared in his early videos. No one could identify them. Then the post fizzled away. There wasn't much of a manhunt for the guy either, because as it turns out, he wasn't a suspect in the Harlingen block murders for longer than 24 hours. There was a survivor of the stabbings, the old man Henry from next door, who said that the person who stabbed him was an old woman. He had seen her face clearly because she attacked with the lights on. He said the woman was naked and covered in blood, and her brown but graying hair was messy and sweat slapped to her face and shoulders. She had a tattoo on her arm that he couldn't recreate on paper. At least 2 other witnesses gave a similar description, and no one claimed to have been stabbed by anyone who looked like Pete. In fact, the whole block seemed to not know who Pete was. No one ever identified the woman, and Pete was gone. Aside from a few documents in the foster system and a dead YouTube channel, there wasn't much evidence to prove that he even existed. About 60 miles west of Harlingen is a small farming town of about 1,300 people called La Grulla. On May 3, 2023, a concerned citizen of La Grulla named Saul installed a surveillance camera on his fence facing Grulla Middle School. He feared one of the migrants of the rising tide might seek food and refuge there for a night. A desperate individual is capable of many things. 2 miles of fields and woods stood between the Rio Grande River and his little town, so he always heard stories of migrants being found, and he wanted to keep an eye on his daughter's route to school each morning. Only once in the beginning did he watch the footage of his daughter's walk to and from the school to make sure he got a clear image of her the whole way. No one could snatch her up on her walk, he decided, without getting caught on camera, and he was proud of himself. But every morning before work, Saul watched the footage from the previous night. He would play it at high speeds and pause and rewind every time there was movement on screen, which only happened twice. Both times it was a stray dog. Then, on May 24th, he woke up and checked the footage as usual, but this time, no fast-forwarding was necessary. The screen came on and a young man with pale white skin and red veiny eyes was staring right into the camera from inches away. He seemed in his early 20s. He was shirtless, and on the left side of his torso was a scar of what seemed to be a recent gash. He was only there for a second or two. It seemed like the young man saw the red light come on to indicate it had started recording, because he ran off down the alley and disappeared into the trees in the distance. Saul sent the footage to La Grulla PD, who sent it to Customs. By 10 a.m., local news stations were showing it all along the Texas-Mexico border. By 6 p.m., it was on national news, and by 6:03, Reddit was alive with the sound of typing. Pete Garcia, caught on camera in La Grulla, Texas, was the title of the post that bustled with internet sleuths gathering to quench their thirst for answers. They waited for updates from the news, but no one had yet come forward saying that they knew the man was the former YouTube personality. Finally, at around midnight, someone on the subreddit said they'd step up to the plate, and they made the call. Police stations across South Texas reviewed Pete Garcia's old YouTube channel and compared it with the footage from La Grulla, and within an hour, police confirmed that the man in the footage was the boy who possibly committed or survived the slaughter in Harlingen back in 2018. The following morning, Harlingen police gave a live press conference saying a search was underway. Later that night, Pete Garcia was found, but not by the police. Investigadores Paranormales Acapulco was a small outfit in, you guessed it, Acapulco, Mexico. Its head paranormal investigator, Alejandro Martinez, claimed to have achieved many victories over the spirits of evil. He'd put lost ghosts back on their paths to the afterlife and banished evil spirits from hotels, office buildings, houses, artifacts, and even people along the Pacific coast of Mexico. He was a regular Ed Warren. His crew was made up of 6 men, all of whom claimed to have witnessed and partaken in exorcisms. One even claimed he had been possessed himself and was saved by Alejandro Martinez. IP Acapulco had recently started live streaming their work on social media, showing the occasional creaking door and disembodied footsteps. but usually nothing even that exciting. Just the men asking an empty room if anyone was there, saying blessings, and moving along. It was creepy nonetheless. In either case, in a world of information and skepticism, IP Acapulco brought a lot of excitement back to the paranormal. On the morning of May 25, 2023, ranchers with land near La Escalera had reported hearing strange sounds on the few previous nights. They had also reported seeing pale figures up in the hills looking down on the neighborhood. Alejandro Martinez kicked into high gear. He gathered his team and drove out to La Escalera. At 11:59 p.m., IP Acapulco subscribers received a notification that their favorite paranormal investigators were going live on any social platform you had. The live feed showed the vast fields, hills, and woods of the Mexican countryside. Their flashlights moved forward and back on the ground as the investigators walked around searching for signs of a paranormal presence. Whispers, groans, or pale figures, anything. The outlines of the hills against the starry night sky were barely visible. After a few minutes, the investigators spoke at a normal volume behind the camera, making no effort to hide from the trespassers in the hills whom they believed were witches. Alejandro's voice was near the camera. In Spanish, he said,
"Cartel activity is not unheard of out here, but they don't hide in the hills and look down at the houses. The behaviors that the ranchers described is common for a coven of witches that I've encountered in the past. They mostly go around Mexico and South America. Not a lot of people will tell you this, but there's all kinds of rich people who acquired their wealth by surrendering their souls to the devil. This particular coven is made up of mostly women, but they do have men sometimes. We encountered a group of them last autumn trying to shoo us away from a blessing we were performing on a haunted hotel in Zumpango. 3 women. They all had the same tattoo on their arm, and when I looked it up, that's how I discovered this coven."
The men continued walking, still streaming and explaining that this coven had recently expanded north into the United States. There was evidence of their activity from California to Louisiana. There were even rumors about them in Florida, even as far north as Appalachia. At 12:06 a.m., Alejandro was still talking.
"They don't have any name that I could find because most of the time a coven doesn't need a name. It's not like the movies where it all has a name and an organization. They just get together and perform their rituals to attract wealth. You'd be surprised how many rich and famous people you've heard of are a part of this group."
It was right then that AlleyCat27 from Reddit arrived at her dorm at Texas Tech University from work. She happened to log into her TikTok and come across the live stream. Most of what she did on the internet involved the paranormal, conspiracy theories, unsolved mysteries, and urban legends. IP Acapulco was one of her favorites. She would later post on Reddit what she saw in this live stream, but no one would believe her because it was too much of a coincidence to find Pete Garcia this way, and that put an end to all the craze about the young man's disappearance. Here's how it happened. Alejandro Martinez continued.
"When we encountered them last autumn, they were standing on top of a staircase at the hotel looking down on us. They were speaking a language that sounded ancient, Middle Eastern, probably Sumerian. A lot of the cults and covens are in these old languages, Aramaic as well. I don't have the linguistical skills to tell the difference. Spanish does just fine when saying the prayers and blessings we need to keep people safe, so I don't need to learn ancient Sumerian or Hebrew or anything like that. While we researched the tattoos, we found reports of that symbol graffitied on walls near places where pale figures were seen at night looking down from hills, rooftops, bridges. There's almost always a murder soon after they report the sightings, or they would find dead animals on the road."
Then one of Alejandro's men shouted to be quiet and they all stopped walking. The man pointed off screen and the camera panned quickly to a hill covered in trees nearby. Quickly, AlleyCat hid the chat box from the bottom of her screen to see every inch of the live feed. On stream, the night was gentle. A soft wind whistled around them, bugs were chirping. One of the men pointed a flashlight at a tree about halfway up the hill. Alejandro pulled out a megaphone and spoke into it.
"Why do you hide? What are you afraid to be seen doing?"
There was no answer, but slowly and in the distance, so it was almost impossible to see if you weren't looking for it, a pale white hand came from behind the tree on the hill. Then a pale face exposed itself just enough to look back at Alejandro and his men with one eye.
"You know you are not welcome here."
Whispers came from behind the camera as the men loaded pistols just in case. They pulled crucifixes from their packs and whispered the Lord's Prayer.
I have engaged in spiritual battle with the power that commands you. I warn you away from these hills. If you leave on your own, there will be no conflict between us.
The figure disappeared behind the tree once again, but moments later they saw movement up the hill as the pale naked witch crawled away.
She was a watchman.
The men began running up the hill, between trees, over shrubs. The glow of the flashlights dashed across the screen. Out of breath, Alejandro spoke to his viewers.
That was most certainly a witch. She might have been too far away to be seen on camera, but she was there.
Then chants began from voices of elder women shouting in the distance that echoed through the woods. The men stopped running. Bugs became silent. The wind halted at the voices. The camera pointed up at the top of the hill, and an orange haze glowed behind it. A fire.
Call fire rescue before it gets out of hand, and give me a pistol.
The camera shook some as Alejandro took the pistol in his hand. His lips smacked a kissing sound behind the camera, perhaps kissing the cross he always had around his neck.
I'm going alone now. My spirit is stronger than my colleagues.
The voices of the women seemed to echo from farther in the distance the closer he came to them. Then in an instant, all the hills reverberated their voices, like the land itself was calling for the devil. Alejandro looked back down the hill and saw his men running away. As he came over the hill, he took a deep breath, and the chanting stopped immediately. There were no witches in sight. The fire was small. Between the trees was a pile of burning wood about 5 feet across. It was well contained, not spreading, and there were no trees above it to catch. But the fire was turning blue.
Leave these hills. God is in the hearts of the men and women in these parts. You are not welcome.
He looked around the fire, small cups and cauldrons, spoons made of wood, stick figures.
There is nothing for you here.
And then, just for a moment, the entire world went quiet, except for one sound, a woman's voice.
Pedro?
In her dorm, Alley Cat leapt to her feet. Her phone fell onto her bed as her heart started racing and her mouth went dry. Alejandro Martinez pointed the camera at the flame. Above it, a man was suspended in thin air. He hadn't been there before. His head was slumped forward, long brown hair covering his face like he was unconscious. He was shirtless and his pale gray skin revealed a scar on the left side of his torso like a gash or a brand. It looked like it was supposed to be in the shape of the symbol this coven of witches had as tattoos, but it was unfinished. The smoke was red as it swirled around him. Alejandro's voice trembled as he whispered the Lord's Prayer in Spanish.
Padre nuestro, que estás en lo...
Alley Cat's phone went blank, and across the screen came the words, "Live has ended." Thank you for listening. If you'd like to read an ebook version of this short story web show, there will be a link in the description to the Amazon page. And welcome to Tangible Terrors. I'll post a new video every first and third Thursday of the month.